Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. On today's episode, I am so excited to introduce you to Jules Shepard. She is the CEO and founder of gfJules, Gluten-free Jules, which is the #1 gluten-free flour and baking mixes company in the US. She's also a highly regarded member of the gluten-free and food allergy community. She has written 3 award-winning books in the space and championed the gluten-free food labeling movement. She is a tireless advocate, 100%, for gluten-free and food allergy community, and she's been educating and lobbying efforts, helped her garner the first ever Gluten-free Person of the Decade award last year, which is woo! Yay! That's so awesome. So, hey, Jules.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining me. Going back to our Twitter conversations was way back when the whole 1 in 33 campaign.
Yeah.
And that's been a while ago.
It's been 10 years.
Wow.
Crazy that it's been that long. Some of the people who were involved in, because of course it takes a village. There's no way I could ever have done that by myself. We were all talking about the fact that this May was 10 years, and it just didn't seem like that was possible. But
wow. And thank you for all that you did. And so for everybody that doesn't know what that means, it's 1 in every 133 people have celiac disease. And that's worldwide or just in the US?
Oh, it's worldwide.
It's worldwide. And that's a stat that I have been using in my presentations for 10, 11 years now. But is that statistic still accurate?
It is, Tracy. They are moving it up to
1 in 100.
But yeah, it's 1 in 100.
Right. So, I mean, that's basically 10% of the population has celiac disease. And then the other scary stat of that is that 89% of them haven't been diagnosed.
Yeah. Well, it's 1%.
Or 1%. Okay.
And you're right. Almost 90% of those people haven't been diagnosed. And, the interesting thing about celiac, and maybe you've run across this in your experience as well, but a lot of people think, I can deal with the symptoms. I just don't want to be able to eat pizza, right? I just deal with the stomach issues, or I don't want to know that I have it, or, a lot of people are that way, especially if they find out someone in their family has it, because of course it's a genetic disease. And so we always say if someone else in your family has it, you really need to get tested, especially if it's in your immediate family. And you run up against a lot of people saying, well, I feel fine. I don't want to get tested. I don't want to know I have that, But the thing about celiac is because it's an autoimmune disease, the older you are when you've been diagnosed, the more susceptible you are to contracting another autoimmune disease. And, you may think that celiac disease isn't all that bad, but nobody wants to get multiple sclerosis or type 1 diabetes or, lupus or, any number of other diseases for which there's a higher mortality rate and a lot of other, problems cascade from there. So it's one of those diseases where it's quite unpleasant to have it, but it also could be worse. And if we know that, we can control that disease, because it's also the only autoimmune disease for which we know the trigger and what we can take away to control it and to put it into remission. We, the patient, have control of that without having to go on dialysis or some other series of horrible medications. We are empowered as the patient to take control of that. And to prevent other disease, that's amazing and truly empowering. So it's a blessing to have that if you're going to have any other disease, right?
Right.
And be able to try to prevent having other diseases flow from there. So, you want people to get tested, and you want that 89 or 90% of those who are running around out there who don't know they have it to figure out that they do.
I love looking at it at that perspective, and the fact that you do have the power to control it, and you do have the power to help yourself be healthier with other autoimmune diseases by doing that.
Yeah, no, it really is. After, of course, no one wants to be told they have a disease. No one,
right.
Ever. But once you get over the shock of diagnosis, and for some, it was a relief to find out. Let's finally get a diagnosis of what's wrong with us, because when you've been sick for so long and not knowing what's wrong, it's nice to be able to finally have a name for it and to be able to figure out what to do. For me, I had been actively sick for 10 years before I was diagnosed. So
wow.
To finally know what it was a huge relief. And to be able to be given some idea of what direction to go in was a huge relief. Of course, back then, what I call the dark ages of gluten-free, there weren't a lot of directions, but we can get into that later. That's kind of why I am here today doing what I do, is because I kind of had to make my own roadmap. But, basically, when you finally do figure out what that is, and you get over the initial shock and awe of that, and you dig deeper into it, it is really a blessing in so many ways to be able to be to take control of your health, because it forces you to read labels, right? And it forces you to become a much better advocate for your own health, and to take control of your diet, and to hopefully stop, eating as much junk food and as much processed food, and to maybe learn to cook a little bit, and to, take ownership of your health. And that's a blessing on so many levels.
Well, and that's just, and that goes into our entire healthcare system, right? Instead of being reactive, let's be proactive and take care of ourselves. And if it's as simple as managing what we eat, that's a whole nother, thought process. And you mentioned and eating healthier, because there's a lot of products that are vegan, gluten-free, that are on the shelves that are not healthy. They're just as bad as, the other pastries or other things that are not gluten-free, right?
Well, and actually, Tracy made a good point. They're oftentimes worse, because there are so many gluten-free flours in particular that are on the market that have a funny taste, or are gritty, or they leave an aftertaste, or they have a smell. And so particularly the cheaper flours that are being used in mass production. And so in order to cover up those funny tastes and smells and grittiness, then a lot of those mass produced items are, they add extra sugar or extra fat in order to produce the same mouthfeel that they have for the regular wheat-based products. So if you just were going to, it's funny, this is the example I have used all along, and you'll use it again, but it sounds totally different now, and you'll understand in a second why. The example I've used all along is if you're going to just take a regular Oreo and you're going to substitute it with a gluten-free Oreo, and now they have gluten-free Oreos that you need to have. You can't just do that and expect to feel good and to feel like you are, suddenly eating healthier, and you're suddenly, I'm gluten-free, and I've taken control of my diet and whatever. You're not even substituting a bad product, which is okay, we can all have an Oreo once in a while kind of thing. Right. If you're just going to go and eat a whole bunch of gluten-free Oreos, you're actually probably eating a worse Oreo for you than the original Oreo, because of the issues that I just brought up. So, and it's not just about Oreos; it's about everything, as you said, the pastries, the breads, all kinds of things like that. If they are processed, they are probably worse for you in many ways. And a lot of those products are also not, enhanced or enriched in a lot of the ways that that the wheat-based products were as well. So you really do need to take ownership of your diet. And the Facebook comment that just came across, and
Yep.
I just saw as well. It's amazing that people don't want to know and they don't want to feel better or whatever, but they don't know what they don't know. And
Right.
until you feel better, you don't know how bad you felt before. And when you do take ownership of it and you stop eating all those processed foods and you do start, cooking more at home or eating healthy or whatever, you don't know how good you could feel.
Right.
So you know what you're missing out on.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's when I went yeast free, when I found out I had an allergy to yeast, and which is sugar and vinegar and dairy and gluten and a variety of things. It's amazing how your body changes within a month, right?
Yeah, it is. It really, really is.
And
the energy and like a lot of people talk about the brain fog. A lot of people are like, I had no idea that I had brain fog, and some didn't have brain fog.
Right.
And I'm saying everybody feels better when they go gluten-free. I am not one of those people who's out there to say, everybody needs to, do the. No, it's not like that. But if your body does not like gluten for one reason or another, celiac or gluten sensitivity, or have a yeast issue, or there's plenty of reasons to avoid gluten. But if one of those applies to you, it's amazing how much better you feel.
Yeah, exactly. And when you get glutened or you get allergened, you really do feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you were a prosecutor.
Yeah.
And you found out you had celiac disease, and you just dropped that and started doing this. I mean, I think I read it took you 2 years to master the recipe for your flour.
Yeah. The original recipe. I've changed it a lot over the years.
Okay.
Yeah, the original recipe took me 2 years to come up with the base recipe for the all-purpose flour. There was a series of things. I was prosecuting domestic violence on a Violence Against Women Act grant in a rural area, and
thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely needed, unfortunately. But I was really burned out because it's a very emotional job.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And I just really needed a break. And it also coincided with the birth of my son. And so I had just taken a break. And that's when I started working on cooking. I was like, well, I'm not really eating well, and I need to eat well. I need to figure out this whole gluten-free thing, because that sort of I was diagnosed when I was prosecuting. I didn't have time to learn how to cook, or I used to cook, but I didn't have time to learn how to cook gluten-free. And so I decided this is the time, and that's when I sort of figured all that stuff out. And then from there, I decided, well, I'm gonna put all of my recipes together in a cookbook, because it will be easier for me personally for them to all be in one place. And I'm trying to make some lemonade out of my lemons. Even if no one ever buys this cookbook, it'll be something for me to say, I did this, and this was like what, 2006 or 7 or something. This was a long time ago, in terms of the gluten-free world, and the cookbook became really popular. I was super surprised. That was the beginning of sort of Amazon, I guess. And people were able to find it. And it was a different perspective on gluten-free, because to that point, and it almost surprises me a little bit that it's still the case today, but to that point, the only way of cooking or baking gluten-free was to pick up a cookbook, and there were very few, but people would say, okay, now add this flour and this flour and this flour, and this flour and this flour and this flour, and then you can make this recipe. Now, if you want to make this recipe, you got to add this flour and then this other flour and this. And by the time you're like exhausted before you ever start the recipe.
And pour.
And then the flours would go rancid, or you would have 4 out of the 7 flours, and then you're like, oh my God. And then they didn't taste good anyway. And so you're just like, forget it. I'm not doing this. And I just sort of said, there has to be a better way, which is the reason why I came up with the flour. Was like, I was not going to get in the kitchen unless it was easy and unless it turned out really, really well. And so I was like, there's got to be an all-purpose flour. There's got to be a way to make an all-purpose flour. And nobody made an all-purpose flour. So I was like, I'm going to make my own all-purpose flour for me. And then when I came up with this after a couple of years of experimenting. And I shared it with some other people. They just couldn't believe how different the results were than everything else that they'd ever tasted, much less how easy it was for them to bake again.
Right.
You have to start with all these other things. So that was, sort of the beginning of everything. And so that I made this cookbook, and I thought, oh, so I did it. I made this cookbook. This is great. And then, people loved the cookbook, and they said, but we don't want to make the flour, because I told people how to make the original recipe of flour. And they were like, this is great, but we don't want to have to make it. I don't really want to make it either. So why don't I figure out how to manufacture the flour? Anyway, that was how it all began. And there were so many problems with having people make their own all-purpose flour. Anyway, because, you live in North Carolina, I live in Maryland. And if I'm going to say, Tracy, go to the store and buy these 5 flours, you're going to find 5 different flours than I'm going to find and on my store shelf. Right. And believe it or not, they come up with a different result. And you may not be able to find 5 certified gluten-free, made in a dedicated facility, raw ingredient flour. Right. And maybe I can't either. And that's hard to do as well. And so it became a situation where I was like, it's not only about it's easier for people, it's actually a safety thing, because if you're going to end up buying 2 or 3 ingredients that aren't even certified gluten-free or aren't made in a dedicated facility, or they're not even a fine, grain so that you can gritty your flour. So it became a situation where I was like, this really makes sense to make it for people so that it's safe. And I can be sure that I'm giving them the highest quality product, and we're all working from the same base. And so all of the recipes I know will work. And then over the years, I've changed the recipe significantly as other flours have become available, and have made it so much better over the years. So it's just been a work in progress, but it's been fun. It's been
That's awesome. Well, and I've had bags of flour in my freezer for God knows how long, and trying to make them and using the weighing them and grams and all of that. And I utilize it, and then I, have to make it some more. So no, this is great. And there is a Facebook comment from Janine that I want to bring up in a minute. But so for everybody, I ordered the flour the other day and got it in the mail. And so, and Janine's comment has something to do with this, but I wanted to note on here. So there's no bean flours, which is like fava bean and garbanzo bean, no brown rice. It's non-GMO, vegan, and no grit. So talk to me about those a little bit. And then Janine's question or comment is about soy, which there's no soy, so there's no legumes in here, but xanthan gum. That sometimes messes with some people's bellies as well. So no bean flours, no rice, no brown rice flour. And then Janine was asking about xanthan gum, which yours does contain. So in here is modified tapioca starch, potato starch, cornstarch, white rice flour, corn flour, and xanthan gum.
Right.
So xanthan gum sometimes messes with people's bellies, but can you talk about what that is and why it's necessary?
Sure. So just backing up a second, the ingredients that are in my flour, as I mentioned, I've changed it a lot over the years. But one of the things that I've done is I've pivoted to using the modified tapioca starches, and I use a few different modified tapioca starches. So there's one kind that I'll use in the muffin mix, and a different kind that I'll use in the cookie mix, and the all-purpose flour has a couple different ones in it, and they're all used for very specific reasons, obviously, to make, the muffins have a beautiful crown on them, and so the cookies don't spread. And so, that, there you go.
I made muffins this morning.
There you go. They look so beautiful. I'm hungry now. But so anyway, what the other nice thing about the modified tapioca starches, and they're non-GMO and vegan and all of that, is that it allows me to use far less of the gums that would ordinarily be utilized in a lot of the gluten-free blends that are out there. Okay. The gums that are used, either xanthan gum or guar gum or psyllium husk, are the traditional things that are utilized in gluten-free baking in order to replicate the gluten, the stickiness that sort of holds things together. So if you don't have that in most gluten-free baking, your end result will sort of crumble and fall apart. So you need to have a little bit of something in there. So the modified starches do help me to hold the product together really well without having those binders. But there is a little tiny bit of binder left that I use. And I tell people, do not add more, because if you do, then it's going to be gummy. Now, the gum that I do use it is carefully selected so that it's grown on the right mediums, and because sometimes xanthan gum can be grown on wheat, and so you have to be really careful about that. So you need to know the sources, which is, again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Like, if you were going to make your own blend and you went and you bought your own xanthan gum, it's hard to find out necessarily what medium was this xanthan gum grown on. So to find all that stuff out can be difficult for the average consumer. So that's one thing that you need to look for when you're sourcing ingredients, and that's something that I do as a manufacturer. So the nice thing is, again, I don't have to use very much of it. I use a lot less than in most other blends, and then I also try to use, obviously the safest and the best sourcing of those types of ingredients.
Well, and that's really, I value that, because it's when you go to the store and you see all those different bags of xanthan gum, or, the different gluten-free flours. And we had pancakes last night, and my mom used a blend, and that she just found at the grocery store, and I won't be using it again. It's just, they don't have good flavor. And then, to be honest with you, Shauna Ahern, a long time ago, she did the pancake contest. I mean, this is like a decade ago. Yeah. And her recipe had, oh my gosh, cardamom in it. And I cannot eat pancakes without cardamom anymore.
Funny. Well, you can always just throw a little bit in when you're, making it with another blend or something. You could just
exactly.
Yeah. Isn't it fun how those spices just enhance things? I just love, like, nutmeg, just a little bit of fresh nutmeg, just trying a little bit.
Yeah. It really does enhance it. And I mean, it's not that, I mean, we used to eat Bisquick pancakes, and I just can't do that anymore. Right. So
Bisquick is 100%. Like, people think, Bisquick makes it gluten-free. Like, yeah, it's not, it doesn't taste the same. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't perform the same. It's not the same, like, type of ingredient. Like, it's interesting that it's got the same name, but it's really, anyway, just whatever.
No, that's really good to know. I mean, and you can try it. And the one cake mix that I found that my mom really likes too is the King Arthur gluten-free cake mix. That's been really good.
Aren't we lucky now, though? Like, fast forward all these years, there are choices, because like, you might love that cake mix, and someone else might be like, it's not my favorite. Well, but we have choices,
Right.
And so, like, didn't used to have choices.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And
I think that's so fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, and I was telling people the other day, I'm like, you need to go buy some chefs in hotels. Right. So, all right. So let's get to, a couple of questions that I sent you in advance. And one of as a meeting planner, and as somebody who goes into restaurants, people have said, well, they're scared to make gluten-free products, right? They're only going to give you the prepackaged, pre-made muffin, that's what they want to give you. But, you do have a dedicated facility that's free of gluten in the top 8 allergens, 9 allergens, right? Sesame too, right?
Sesame too.
And
certified now. We're certified free from the top 8 food allergens. Hi. And we will be certified free. I'm assuming we'll pass, because
right.
Sesame, and then once the certification is available, we will be certified free from sesame as well. So
awesome.
It's been really important to me, because there's so many. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. I mean, you have your own dietary restrictions, but in your work, when you deal with these situations where you're trying to make food accessible to as many people as possible, most people, when they learn that they can't have gluten or they can't have one thing or another, it's not just that. Like they figure out, oh, it's not just that, I have something else. Like I have dairy, and that's, I've learned that along the way. I can't have a lot of the FODMAPs that are out there, Garlic is not something that agrees with me. So, there are lots of things that people learn along the way that they can't have. So it's been really important to me to make my products and my recipes as accessible to as many people as possible. So like one of my cookbooks is called Free for All Cooking, and it teaches people how to, if you can't have this ingredient or that ingredient or whatever, how do you make those substitutions and still make it delicious for everybody and not dumb down the recipe so much or the product so much that nobody wants to eat it. And that's, what, like you and I have discussed as well about like, how do you work with chefs so that it's not just all boiled chicken and rice? Like, it's got to be interesting. It's also got to be safe, and it's got to be a happy medium.
Well, making the muffins this morning, and I saw the flour. I turned on the mixer, right, and flour went, out. And that's one of the things that's really important to know is that making a gluten-free product in a kitchen, you need to make them first, because when you make a regular or a gluten-filled pastry, the flour is going to get in the air and it floats. Is it 12 hours, 24 hours? Something like that.
The recommendation is that depending on, bakeries are another animal altogether, but if you are making anything with flour like that, if it's possible, what we recommend for bakeries, depending on their schedules, if you can do it and let the bakery sort of rest over the weekend, what you do is you wash all the equipment on Friday, let everything settle over the weekend, wash it again Monday, and then run your food allergen free products Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, however long you need to. And then when you're done with all that, then you run your allergens again. Wash it and let it settle over the weekend, wash it again, and then go.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And you can, so that just goes to show that you can make products that meet the needs of everyone as long as you follow the protocols in the back of the house. And it might not be so much when you're doing multiple meals at a time in the culinary kitchen or catering kitchen or a hotel kitchen. But if you have dedicated space or equipment, you could potentially do it.
Right. And so when we're training restaurants, it depends. Every restaurant's different because what the space that they have that's available is always going to be different. But, you work with them in where they are. You meet them where they are and you look at what they're trying to do and who they're trying to serve. And, you carve out a space if you can. You carve out time if you can. You give them these allergen prep kits. You give them dedicated utensils, or you help them to allocate dedicated utensils, dedicated plates, dedicated servers, all of these things so that you can sort of make it, when they're in the weeds in the middle of serving, you don't want them to have to think. You want it to be, this is, everything is purple, right? It's food allergen free. Everything is in this corner. Everything is square plate, whatever it is. And everyone knows that. And the training is essential. But at the end of the day, it's only as strong as the weakest link. And the training part of it is really the piece that is so essential. And there's such high turnover in restaurants. And that's, really where it comes down to, you've got to talk to the manager every time when you're the patron. You've got to go in there and say, like, I need to speak to someone other than, just the person who's serving me. I need to know, that they know exactly what's going on and that, we're all on the same page here about like exactly what, the meal that I'm being served. But, some environments are just far riskier than others.
Right.
There's certain ethnic restaurants and there's very, very little gluten or there's very little, ambient flour, there's very little risk in something like that. You go to a bakery, it's a whole other animal. So you have to take everything as a restaurateur and as a diner, you have to take everything into consideration and see, whether it's worth the risk, either bringing that to your patrons or as a diner saying, I'm going to take this risk today and eat here. maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not, depending on, the assessment of the risk.
Well, and that's just doing your work in advance and calling up and saying, hey, I'd like to come in. What can you do for me? Right. And I think it's a lot easier if you've got a restaurant that's got a scratch kitchen, making things from scratch versus purchasing everything. Right.
Yeah. And fast food versus
right. Exactly. Yeah.
They've had prepackaged sauces versus making their own. And of course, going at off hours, all of those tips and things like that we work on, trying to share with people. And we encourage people to try to, yes, you can absolutely eat out, but it has to be the right environment, the right time of day, the right preparation on your part, all of that kind of stuff. Absolutely you can, but, and not everybody can. Like some people have like really extreme food allergies and sensitivities, and certain situations, they're just not going to be able to eat, but there's certain that they can. And again, everybody's different. Every restaurant's different. And it's a unique situation that you have to take into consideration yourself before you make that assessment.
So as a person who eats gluten-free and dairy-free, what best practices have you seen from going to conferences? Have you seen them? What would you like meeting planners and hoteliers to help you eat?
What I really like is when they list ingredients. It's nice when they say this is gluten-free and this is dairy-free, or this is vegan, or this is nut-free, or whatever. But sometimes I'm not sure that they know what they're talking about. And I would like to know what the ingredients are so that I can make that assessment for myself. And, we see that all the time, with manufacturers of products, and restaurateurs do the same thing, where they're trying to do their best, but they make mistakes. And you see that a lot with like malt flavoring or soy sauces, where, they maybe have been told that this particular soy sauce is gluten-free, but it's not gluten-free. There's a lot of, we've talked about the labeling. It's nice that we now have gluten-free food labeling. It doesn't mean that everyone understands it and that everyone follows it accurately. So let me be the judge of that for myself. Like, I want to know if there's soy sauce in this. I would like to see the soy sauce. I'd like to see the ingredients of the soy sauce, and I'll make the judgment for myself. So don't tell me it's gluten-free. Tell me what's in it. That would be a more helpful thing. And I've seen that done at some conferences, and it does really go a long way towards making you feel more confident as a diner.
And for meeting planners out there and even catering teams that are scared to put all of those ingredients in there, put it on something that's to the side, so that, hey, and tell Jules, hey, you can go to such and such person and they've got the full ingredient list, right?
Yep.
And you don't need to put it on the labeling, because I know it gets cumbersome when now we're doing a lot of breakdown of food and beverage, so it's lots of different labels, but make sure that you've got it. Maybe it's on the app, the event app. You click it and you can put the full ingredient list, or the banquet captain has the full ingredient list, right? Yeah.
You can have, I've seen a lot of different ways. And sometimes it's a cleaner list than others, and it's a lot easier to list everything out.
Right.
But I've seen it where people have said they've had the tags out, and they'll say like, gluten-free, egg-free, nut-free, whatever, and have this little asterisk, and it'll say, ask for ingredients or something like that.
Right.
And ask, and then they'll have the book.
Yep. Yeah. I think that because I love the labeling at Whole Foods on the hot bar, but that would be too much to put on a catering buffet.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, as I'm sure, you've told everybody until you're blue in the face, it's really important. The serving spoons have to be, kept separate. And then when you have a line, you put all the things that are food allergen safe first, and then the things that are not food allergen safe later, so that it's not possible for those things to get dripped on and the spoons to get moved around and all that kind of stuff. So it's just really simple stuff that, it's super easy to lay it out, and no one really notices that you've done it. Not aware of it. Like, if they're not the food allergen customer themselves, then they're not thinking about it. They're not like, that's odd that the croutons are at the wrong end. Like, they're not thinking about that.
Right.
Food allergen patrons, like, that's awesome because I know there's no crouton that made it onto the salad because the croutons are weight on there or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just little things like that make a really big difference.
I like that idea too. I mean, or you've got salad with cheese and salad without cheese, and they're right next to each other, and somebody picks up the tongs and puts them in, uses them in the other salad, etc.
Yeah.
So what does it take? Because so on here on your labeling, you've got it's certified kosher. Let me make sure I got that right, and certified gluten-free. Yeah. So can you tell people, what it took to do that and how important that is as a person with different dietary needs?
Sure. Well, those are two totally different types of certifications, as is the certified free from, which is not on that label yet.
Right.
It's a brand new certification. We just got it, and it's on our website, and we have new packaging that's actually being printed right now and will be coming out. Our next production run will be in the new packaging. You'll see that certification. They're all different. So the kosher certification that we get is through the Orthodox Union, and they have rabbis that come out and they have their own list of requirements that you have to meet for the kosher certification. And that needs to be done annually, and you have to just abide by their list of requirements for that. And ours is really simple because we don't have any meat or cheese or anything like that, which makes things more complicated for kosher.
Right.
With regard to the certified gluten-free, there are different certifying agencies for that. We use the Gluten-free Certification Organization, which tests everything that we produce has to test to less than 10 parts per million gluten.
Okay.
And as you know, the federal standard is less than 20 parts per million gluten in order to be labeled gluten-free. So I wanted, as a celiac myself, I wanted the highest standard and the most rigorous testing agency that there was. So I chose the Gluten-free Certification Organization because out of all the testing organizations that are out there at the moment, that has always been the one, and still to date so far is the one that has the most rigorous testing in my mind. Okay. So that's what I went with. Now, what that means is that they come into my my plant where the products are produced, and they audit, they look around, they inspect, they make sure that we're doing everything to their specifications in terms of testing raw ingredients as they come in. We also have to test every single production run as it comes out. So we test to less than 10 parts per million gluten, as I mentioned. And then we have to send them all of those test results. And then they also will purchase my products randomly and test themselves. And we have to maintain all of this paperwork and the test results and all of that kind of stuff. We have to maintain that for a period of months and years, and we have to re-up that.
Wow.
And then the certified free from is a lot similar to that. We have to test for all 8 and will be 9 food proteins. And we have to do that before doing production runs. So,
and are those both annual as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's, I mean, that's pretty rigorous. And I like the fact that it's a third party, right? Absolutely. Doing that certification.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because there are a lot of products that are out there that claim gluten-free status, and that's fine. You're allowed to do that under the federal gluten-free food labeling regulations. But as I said, I mean, as a celiac myself and wanting the highest standard and the highest quality products and the highest safety standard, I wanted to assure my customers that I was doing everything possible to make sure that my products were safe. And that to me is like giving that testing to a third party. I didn't want to just say, "Oh, trust me, I test." And there are a lot of companies that do that. And in fact, under the federal labeling regulations, there is no requirement to test. And that is very surprising to people when they learn that. Something that we were opposed to when the regulations were put into place, but we wanted some regulation versus no regulation. And this was in order to get some regulation. That was part of the deal. So in other words, any manufacturer can claim gluten-free status for their product as long as they say that their product contains less than 20 parts per million gluten. There is no requirement that they test it and prove that there's less than 20 parts per million gluten.
Wow.
And so if there is a manufacturer out there that has a gluten-free label on their product and they are not independently certified, they may or may not test. And if they test, they may or may not test every time. They may test and not pull it if it didn't meet that test. It could be less than 20 parts per million gluten. This one might be 25, and they may be like, okay. Like, so, to me, as a celiac, I wanted someone else to put their seal on it, because what that means is that when I see a seal, I know that that company has to test, and that if they fail the test, that the certifier is going to make them recall their products because they're product. And so we've seen several examples of companies in the past who have not had an independent certification and have been slow to recall their products, or maybe haven't recalled their products.
Right.
When, they weren't forced to do so, because the FDA really doesn't get around to doing that very much, unfortunately. And so the seal itself is an indication that the independent certifier has the authority to say, you didn't meet my requirements, that product's getting pulled.
I'm trying to do this backwards. Yeah. So that gluten-free certification, I'm just going to leave it right there. Yep.
I have an article on my website showing pictures of what all the independent certification seals
are. Okay.
Because I think it's really important for people to see it so that when they're shopping, they know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Because, there are a lot of other, manufacturers make their own little seals that they put on there that kind of look
right,
but they're not. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with saying that their products are gluten-free without certifying it. But if you're looking for the highest standard, you're looking for something that could be recalled if it didn't meet those things, if you're looking for all of those things, then you're going to want to look for an independent certification seal. So it's on my website, and it's called
Shopping for Safe Gluten-Free Products.
Yeah, how to read food labels. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Perfect. I will find it. How to read food labels. Okay. Well, that's really good to know. And because Dr. Gupta was talking about too, in a couple of podcast episodes ago, was made in a facility that, also produces this, or, may contain. And so she's doing research on what people think of what that means for both of those statements, because just so for the listeners to know, they're not regulated by the FDA. Those statements are not regulated. So
permitted. Yes.
Yeah.
You can make those statements. You do not have to make those statements.
Right.
And so it very, because you'll find some manufacturers will make those statements and others won't. And it makes it seem perhaps like those products are less safe when maybe they actually aren't less safe. Maybe that manufacturer is just doing a CYA, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I just want all of the food allergy customers to know there's, if there's a shred of a possibility, or I don't know, it's hard to say
why
they might choose to do it and others wouldn't. But just because a product doesn't say that on there does not mean that it's using too many double negatives. Does not mean it's not made in a facility where there also is. And
that's a good point too. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can also have a certification from an independent agency if it's made in a facility with gluten. You
wow.
Qualify for a certification.
That's good for people to know.
That also confuses people. People are like, whoa, how can it possibly be certified gluten-free if it's also made in a facility with gluten? Like, it can be. And it's because they have met such rigorous standards, and they test and they, wash and whatever. And just because it's made in the facility doesn't mean it's necessarily made on the same equipment or in the same room or anything else. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it could be that it's like way far away or something.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So there are lots of different things. And I always tell people, you have a question, call the manufacturer.
Right.
I mean, if they can't answer your question to your satisfaction, then don't buy their product.
Right.
But they can answer your question and they'll say, oh, we put that on there just because we want people to know, whatever. But it's like 3 buildings away. I don't know. I'm making it up.
Yeah.
They could answer your question and make you feel a lot better about it as a consumer.
Well, and it's like that could be with some hotels or some restaurants that have a dedicated kitchen, or that's, a restaurant. I don't know how many restaurants are big enough to have 2 different kitchens, but, a hotel could actually have 2 different kitchens, right? And they could potentially do it in that separate kitchen. Because especially when some hotels have kosher kitchens inside their hotel, they have regular ones and then kosher certified. So, yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Okay, so what are some websites besides your own, which I've given some links? I just put the link to the blog and to that blog post about reading labels, and I will also put the shopping link there too, so people could get some products. So, besides that, do you have any people that you rely on to get good information about eating gluten-free?
Well, I personally subscribe to Gluten-free Watchdog. .org. Thompson does a great job of testing gluten products for gluten, and I just love her take on things. She and I are friends, and she tells it like it is, so I love that. So I always go to her on a lot of issues, and I do subscribe. So I pay the monthly fee, which I think is worth every penny. She's great. And I don't know, there's lots of good resources out there. You have to take everything though. There's so many bloggers out there that are, unfortunately, they take money or take free product or whatever, and it's becoming like really difficult to know, anymore, whether that's they're doing it for the right reasons. And
right. Yeah.
We have little chat groups of some of us bloggers who are like, that's really dangerous, especially when it comes to restaurants, because you'll see some of these bloggers are like, oh, look at this gluten-free bagel. I love this bagel or whatever. And they're at some restaurant and it's, it's not safe at all. And
right.
Why are you doing this? And then you realize they just got paid for it. And so it's hard to dig deeper as a reader and make sure that you're actually getting information that's safe, and you have to make sure that you're going to trusted sources. So I start with that, and then there's a couple good articles, like on CDF has got a couple good articles. The Celiac Disease Foundation, Beyond Celiac has some good articles. You have to just go to those trusted resources here and there. Dr. Fasano wrote a good book, Gluten Freedom, which I was just looking. I couldn't believe it was written in 2014, but I helped this book, and I couldn't believe it was 2014. But anyway, it's a really good compendium of information that I think anybody who has celiac disease or gluten sensitivity should read this book. I think it's really, really good. Dr. Fasano is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
So those are some good resources that.
Right. And I'm going to jump because you said a bagel. You said bagels. So my niece has been making bagels in her apartment in DC. And so on your website, you say, I can make bagels with this flour.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
I'm going to make her make me some.
My bread mix as well. I love making homemade gluten-free bagels. They're so good, and they're really easy. I have a video.
Yep.
Making them. So yeah, but the key is boiling them. To make a real bagel, you got to boil.
Yep.
them.
Yeah, she's doing them in her dorm room.
I love her. I used to bake in my dorm room. I was very popular for baking cookies in my dorm room, but that I did not make bagels.
Well, I think dorm rooms have been upgraded since you and I were in college.
Because I don't even know how I would have made a bagel in my dorm room. I mean, I had like a toaster oven, which was completely illegal, and that's how I made the cookies. So I don't think I should have been doing that, but I don't know how I would have made a bagel. But yeah, it sounds like I had a few more advanced kitchen equipment
Yeah, I was like, you have a stove in your, she has cooktop and whatever. She's like, she had to do them one at a time. And she's like, I can't do this one at a time. But she's going to be here in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Your niece is a rock star. I love that.
She's actually up at American University, so I should send her your way.
That's fine. That's awesome.
Yeah.
People. I love that.
Yes. So she'll be here in next weekend. So I'm going to keep this flour for her so she can make me some bagels.
Definitely.
Yeah. Because I can't do the yeast that's in your bread mix.
But see, the yeast packet is separate, and I have directions for how to do it without the yeast. So
okay,
bread mix is still the way to go.
Okay,
produces a better, like, it's just easier. You have to add other stuff.
Okay, perfect. Then I will go online and order that today, so that it's here when she gets here.
There you go.
Okay, so the one question that I always ask everybody is, what is your favorite food and beverage?
Oh, okay, so that's easy. My favorite food is anything Thai.
Okay.
Just Thai cuisine in general. I probably make that at home in our kitchen like 3 or 5 or 7 nights a week.
Wow.
And, I love Thai food. So the spices, the flavors, the sauces, I cook with it all the time. And beverage, well, now that there's gluten-free beer available, which did not used to happen before, back in the day, there didn't used to be gluten-free beer. So I switched to wine, which I love red wine. But so it's a toss-up between red wine and like some really good gluten-free beers. Okay.
Awesome. And do you have a favorite gluten-free beer?
Well, the problem is that I can't get my favorites here. So I rely upon these delicious companies to send them to me. Actually, I can get Glutenberg white, which is amazing. I love it. My husband actually says it tastes like a wit beer, a Belgian wit beer, like a true wit beer. He says,
"Oh wow."
That, which I can't comment on because I can't have it, obviously. But he said it tastes just like that, and so that's a really good beer. But like Aurochs, I love, and that's out of Pittsburgh area. Ghost Fish, I love. Can't get that here. I'm trying to think what else I've had that I really love that I can't get. Another one that I really liked recently. It wasn't a beer though. It was Fisher's Lemonade, but it's like a spiked kind of a lemonade. Oh goodness! I just added it. I have a super popular post. People say, "What's the most popular post on your website?" I'm like, the best gluten-free cake recipe. And my article on alcohol. Those are my most popular posts on my site.
Wow.
And so I have this huge article on all kinds of gluten-free alcohols, and I added the Fisher's one to it because it was like so good. And all my favorite beers in there, and then you can find information on that Fisher's Lemonade and some other, all about sake and why distilled alcohol is gluten-free and stuff is
awesome. So I will make sure I copy that and post it with this feed so everybody's got it. Well, thank you, Jules, for being here on the show, and thank you for everything that you've done since you first got diagnosed to help us all eat safer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help. That's what I wanted so badly when I was diagnosed, was for someone to help me, and so I'm happy to have been able to give back and to do it for others.
All right. So one question on the beer. Janine asks, are those beers gluten-free or just gluten removed?
Oh gosh, no, they're all gluten-free. I have several articles on my website about gluten removed beers and about what the difference between gluten removed and gluten-free beers are. But no, the beers that I'm recommending are all naturally gluten-free. They're made from gluten-free grains like millet, sorghum, rice. There's no barley harmed in the production of those beers. You can search on my website. I have articles on gluten-removed beers and all about them as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome.
All right. So you and I will connect on Maryland and North Carolina at another time because I love that connection. Yes. And that your mom was the principal here, which is mind blowing.
It's a very small world.
It is a very, very small world. So Thank you for being here and being my guest. I appreciate it. And Janine said, my husband is excited. It was a great conversation. Thank you for listening in.
Thanks for having me. And you go enjoy Newbern for me, okay?
I will do that. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is the Eating at a Meeting podcast. Today was Jules Shepard, founder of gfJules, a gluten-free flour and muffin mix company. So go buy her products. They're delicious. So everybody, until next time, stay safe and eat well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.